Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to the Hearthstone Weekly Show. Now, for this week we're doing something a little bit different. Something which I said I would do about 2 weeks ago actually, if I did in fact hit Legend, as I was really trying to get it this season, and I felt as if I could, and since I took such a long break from sort of at being at the top level of Hearthstone, I took a really long break. I got really frustrated with the game, and I came back into the game as sort of a mid-level player with a lot of actual knowledge about the game, as opposed to a well-practiced pro player, which is what I was when I actually left. So I had a lot to climb, and last season I only got to rank 4 and I really struggled to get there. So this season I sort of had to figure out what was wrong with me as a person and with the approach I was having to this whole legend climbing thing, and I think I have figured out at least what was the problem with me coming into this, because I do a lot of analysis on pro players. It's kind of what I do. My job is to point out misplays from better players than I am when it comes to actually playing the game. So it was a very, very weird transition for me, and I thought I might share some of the things I have sort of figured out with the rest of the people who are trying to get up from that rank 5 area. Now, the rest of this stuff, this advice sort of, it applies to everyone really. If you're rank 5 roughly, if you're rank 6 or rank 5, you could get to legend if you apply this kind of mentality and this kind of sort of setup to the way you do things. However, if you're not up to that level yet, you can still use it to climb the ladder in some regard. If you're rank 16 maybe, you can get up to 10 or something just by doing this and sort of continuously getting better as a player. And if you're rank 10, you can probably get to the gold ranks at rank 5 without having to depend on win streaks that much. Just things like that. The whole point of this video is to try and teach people how to actually climb up the ladder. Depending on where you are, it's going to be more difficult. But the point is you can still all apply this kind of knowledge to climbing up the ladder, whether it be slowly or quickly. So anyway, we're going to be going over 6 different points. Now, the first one is the general mistakes while laddering. Now, I'm going to be covering this in between each point because it's more of a general sweeping thing as opposed to a single point I can actually use. So we'll start with the second one then. What kind of deck to pick? This is actually a very, very important thing, and for this we're actually going to go into Hearthstone and sort of have a bit of a look around and look at some of the issues when it comes to actually choosing a deck. Now, I'm going to admit that when I actually came onto this whole thing, I struggled last season. So first place I did look was Hearthstone to see if I could find some sort of deck that would get me up the ladder fairly quickly and wouldn't be too difficult to pilot. Since then I have discovered that pretty much no deck is easy to pilot to actually get to legend. Some take less learning than others, and some are just faster. So what I would recommend doing first is find a class that you're comfortable with, because pretty much every single class can get legend, some easier than others, but pretty much every single class can get legend. There is at least one person who has got legend with each of the classes, probably several hundred people, even with some of the less known ones like Mage and Paladin, for example. And there's several streamers who have got it with Priest. So even the lower down classes have actually managed to get legend. So pick a class you're actually familiar with and one you would feel fine playing continuously, because one of the major problems with people trying to get up the ladder is they keep switching decks. You can't keep switching decks. If you keep switching decks, it hurts your play overall with all of them. So every single time you switch a deck, you drop a bit, and then you go up, and then you switch decks again, you drop even more, and you're going down, not up. So that generally is what happens when you see people who are rank 3 or 4, and they start going to 5, 6, 7. It's just because they keep switching decks that they're not familiar with, and it really does hamper your ability to actually climb the ladder. Now, what I would recommend, especially if it's your first time actually getting to legend, would be pick a quick deck. You don't want to pick a slow deck. People can pick slow decks, and they do take slow decks to legend all the time, but slow decks are very frustrating to play with if you haven't done it before, because you don't know that you have sort of inevitability. I mean, most of the popular streamers and pro players and such are always playing anyway, so they just play a slow deck that they know that they're going to play with in tournaments to get practiced with it, and they take that to legend. It takes a while, but they do eventually get there, and they're fine with it. The problem is that almost every single good deck you can find, if you learn it enough, will have about 55% win rate to 60, and if you play a slow deck, that will take you weeks. Weeks and weeks and weeks if you're only playing for a couple hours a day. Whereas if you take a really, really fast deck, it won't take as long. It took me about 2 weeks of climbing to get to Legend this particular season, and that was playing about 2 to 3 hours a day roughly, just going at a 55% win rate. It is possible to actually do it not playing that much, but if you really want to do it with a slow deck, it's either going to take you the entire season to do so and you'll never stop climbing, or it'll just get frustrating and you'll stop. That's what generally happens to people who play slower decks. They get frustrated with the deck and it gets a little sketchy. So I would recommend picking a fast deck. Now, the fastest decks you can actually pick are things like Paladin aggro, there's a Mage Rush, there's a Rogue aggro deck, there's a couple of them. Even Warrior aggro, Zoo is one of the most popular archetypes we're laddering with because it moves so quickly and the deck is actually quite powerful. Now, what I ended up picking was the infamous Hunter Rush deck. Now, halfway through my ladder season, the Unleash the Hounds was actually nerfed, and it didn't affect much. It really didn't. I dropped down slightly, but I had to change my playstyle a bit, but eventually it stabilized out and it went back to exactly what it was. So don't get discouraged by small nerfs. You actually have to think about the nerf as opposed to just riding off the deck, which is what a lot of people did. So I did actually get to Legend with Hunter, and I pretty much only played Hunter. I played a little bit of Rogue, not too much success. I'm trying to relearn the Rogue deck now, Tempo Rogue. I'm learning Miracle at the moment, and I did play a bit of Tempo Rogue. And the other deck I played a bit of was Zoo and also some Shaman midrange. But I played about 15 games between Rogue and Shaman, and maybe 10 to 15 games of Warlock, but I played close to 400 games of Hunter, so it wasn't really comparable, and I would recommend sticking to one deck because I actually dropped in ranks when I switched decks. I didn't go up as I thought I would, because I got frustrated with the metagame a couple of times, kept running into Warriors over and over and over again with the Hunter deck, and I kept switching decks, and then I was just dropping because I kept playing against other archetypes. Now, in terms of the Warrior problem, I did actually end up, instead of switching the deck, I switched my entire playstyle. So, if anyone is actually curious, I can do a fully fledged deck tech on the version of the Hunter Rush deck I actually sort of created. I took a skeleton of one and I changed it over time to a version which I'm actually quite happy with. It's up on Hearthstone actually, and you can go check it out. I'll put the link to the deck in the description. But the matchup against Warrior was always quite difficult for me, and I ended up revamping my entire playstyle in it. So it started at about 30% win rate and ended up at about 45. And I think if I'd kept going, it would have been up to 50. So there are ways of dealing with bad matchups. You just have to get very, very good at playing those bad matchups. That's one of the most important things when actually selecting a deck. Now, as for the rest of things when selecting a deck, you want to be looking for decks that have made Legend before or have been played by very, very good players. So you've got things like the Season 2 Legend, you've got Rush deck that's actually post-nerf. If you go into the Warlock area, there's a bunch of Zoo decks, and you can probably find one that's fairly high ranked. There's pretty much one for every single class has some sort of legend-based one or one made by a pro player. So pick one of those, because generally taking your own deck up to Legend is very, very difficult, especially when you do it the first time, because you don't have as much confidence in yourself to actually get there. And one of the most important things is keeping yourself motivated. So if you know you're playing a good deck, you'll get there eventually. But don't be afraid to change the deck slightly to your own playstyle. So, to sort of recap, pick a fast deck, because you don't want to get frustrated with the deck you're actually playing. Pick a deck that you have confidence in. So pick a class you really enjoy playing, and also try and get it from either a website that has pro players putting up deck info, or get it from someone who's already made the Legend race before, so you don't have that sort of extra doubt coming from the actual deck you're playing. You really don't need that. But if you do need to make changes because you don't agree with some stuff, go ahead and do it. I did plenty of changes in the end. I made a few too many changes, and I actually went backwards a little bit, and I went back to the original thing and I did slightly better. But then eventually I settled on a couple of changes I liked, and the deck worked pretty well. So don't be afraid to fiddle around with the deck a bit. but the skeleton you want is definitely one that's reliable and one that has been preferably designed by someone who's done the legend run before, because it's proved that it can be done if you play enough and you play correctly. Now, on to the actual third point. Recording win-loss ratio. Now, for this, I'm going to be going on to a program I have been using. Now, this is Hearthstone Tracker. There's a couple of others. There's like Hearth Tracker, and there's MK Jogo, and there's things like that. Although MK Jogo is more of a deck builder as opposed to a win-loss ratio collector. But what this does is it recognizes, it's a visual recognizer that recognizes every single time you enter a game, as long as it's running. At the moment it's freaking out because Hearthstone isn't running, but it recognizes whenever you're in a game and then records whether you win or lose. Sometimes it gets wrong, but you can change them in post. So if I click this, this is actually a concede, that's why duration is so slow, but the duration in minutes is fine, the duration in turns makes no sense, by the way, so ignore that. But it shows you the matchup, it shows you vaguely how long it took, shows you what mode it was in, but you can edit all of this stuff, even the deck. And what it does overall is it just compiles all this information. You see there's a ridiculous amount of Hunter in here. But it compiles all the information you actually got, and it puts it into statistics. So it's got win-loss from this month, today, things like that. Today hasn't been too good, but I've been testing a bunch of random stuff in casual, so it makes sense. But it shows you your overall win-loss, going second, going first. This statistic is really buggy, so don't pay attention to this if you end up using this program. It does not realize when you're going second or first, so that's why I've been first like 4 times as many times. Also shows you which classes you've been playing the most, and sort of what classes you've been playing against the most, which is actually fairly important. So Warlock is the most popular from what I've been playing against, and then Rogue. Now, this is just the basic stuff. You can also use it for arenas, which I've only done 1 arena, and it was a terrible arena. I'm not an arena player. But this is sort of my favorite part of this. Now, pie charts are very, very easy to read, which is why sometimes you want to be using this stuff. This gives you your overall information, which you saw on the games page. But this is sort of the most interesting bit of this, and it's a bit complicated to use. Now, I'm just gonna turn off the coin and no coin stuff because it's pretty pointless. But it shows you all the matchups. So if you go on to the Hunter one, which is what I used, it shows the total number of games. It was actually 400 exactly when I hit Legend. The extra 1 games from a tournament that was yesterday, it was cancelled because of the Blizzard servers. But it shows you the total number of games, it shows you your win-loss percentage, total coin, no coin is pointless, but it also shows you for all of your other matchups. Now, the red ones are really, really abysmal, yellow not too good, and green, I presume, is ridiculous, although I haven't seen a green one, because it's actually quite difficult to get a win rate that high. But it shows you your overall, so you got sort of 55%, 46, 70 in the mirror match, 50-50, things like that. Now, this is important because it lets you realize when you have a problem with a certain matchup, because whenever you try and think about matchups, you have a habit of getting very, very frustrated whenever you're thinking of matchups, because you keep thinking, oh, I hate this class, and then you realize you've only played against it 3 times. It just happens to be 3 in a row. This happened once to me with Paladin. I played against Paladin 4 times in a row, which is a pretty miserable matchup for my decks. They play a lot of healing. And I didn't come across enough Paladins to sort of improve my way of playing that. Same thing happened with Priest. But the other matchups I played a lot of got better over time. Things like Druid was really bad, Warrior was really, really bad. Rogue, I think Rogue was the opposite. Rogue actually was insanely good, and as the Rogue players got better, this is how Miracle Rogue works, the win percentage got worse. It stabilized at about 60 though, when I got into Legend, which makes sense. Same with Shaman, around 60, that win percentage became slightly less as I got up. Generally, your good matchups will become slightly closer, and your bad matchups should also become slightly closer as you get closer and closer up the ranks. Now, one of the reasons this is so important is because it lets you focus on where the mistakes you're making are and what the actual bad matchups are. So if something's really abysmal, then it probably means that the matchup can't possibly be that insanely bad. It can't possibly be it. It actually has to be something to do with your playstyle. It's happened with Warrior, happened with Druid. Again, Priest and Paladin haven't had enough practice against because they're so rare. But in general, it means that there's something to do with your play which needs to change. It could be play style, even if you're not... I mean, sometimes the obvious play is not the best one. That's the most important thing to realize. Sometimes the obvious play is not the best one. This kind of program lets you realize it. The other thing it lets you do, which ties into the next couple of points, is it motivates you. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, whenever you go into a game, on the game screen, whenever you go into a game, a little black panel will turn up, kind of like this one. But it shows you two pie charts with your win percentage and going first, going second. Like, it shows your win percentage with the class, shows your win percentage in the matchup. And what this does is it means that if you play against a bad matchup and you lose, you feel less frustrated because you weren't expecting to win that game. Whereas if you play a really, really good matchup for you, you feel more motivated and you actually play better. So it's a psychological thing, but don't underestimate sort of the power of the psychological effect that Hearthstone can have, especially when you're trying to grind it out so much. Anyway, so as far as mentality goes, I'm going to go back to the Hearthstone page for this, and the reason for this one is because, well, there's this going on. Now, the Deck Wars thing, which I'm totally going to be watching this weekend, by the way, but the Deck Wars thing is a perfect example of what is wrong with most Hearthstone players who have not made a Legend yet. And this is one of the major problems I had, which is watching games and pointing out misplays while thinking you're a better player than the pro players. This happens a lot. Even if you don't think you do it, most people do. Most people do. Just look at Twitch chat. The amount of times the Twitch chat try to say, oh, he missed lethal, and there's a phrase called chat legal because of this, which is when the chat actually is wrong about the lethal. This is because people watching Hearthstone pro players want to try and catch them out because they feel like they're better than them, and oh, they just got the lucky break and things like that. No, they didn't. They actually had to work very, very hard to get where they are. Even people with the lucky break still had to work very, very hard to get where they are. The most talented players have to play hours and hours and hours a day. No, they weren't lucky to get there. They actually are there because they did very, very well. And the occasional misplay happens to everyone. One of the best ways around this is to realize that if you actually record one of your games and watch them, you will realize 5, 6, 7 misplays sometimes. It is ridiculous. The amount of misplays the average player makes in the average game that's 15, 20 turns long is pretty high. The average amount of misplays a pro player will make in that kind of game, 1 or 2. And that's the major difference. So one of the things you have to get out of your head as far as mentality goes is that you're not better than pro players. If you were, you would be in Legend right now and you wouldn't have to watch this video trying to figure out how to actually get there. So get that mentality out of your head, and it's something that I had problems with, and it's one of the reasons I struggled so much last season is because my entire sort of YouTube channel is dedicated to going over professional players and deck lists and things like that. So I have the knowledge to do it, but I didn't actually have the mental discipline or the actual ability in game to pull it off, and that is a massive disattach. Watching games and analyzing them is much easier in some aspects. It's a little tricky in others, but it's a different experience to actually playing is the point. It's a very, very different experience, and it should be treated as such. They don't really have a connection. So from your perspective as a spectator, you're thinking about what the actual play was in that regard, and you're thinking, oh, that was a terrible misplay. But from the pro player's perspective, he's thinking about the 15 different cards he needs to play around, otherwise he's going to get completely destroyed. So there is a big disconnect there. Now, the other thing that you need to realize with mentality is tilting. Now, this sort of comes back into motivation. Tilting is what is going to completely destroy any hopes of you getting anywhere. Now, a lot of streamers do this. A lot of very well-known streamers do this. And they tilt a lot. But they don't tilt as much as a lot of other players do. I mean, if you look at some of the streamers like Forsen, for example, he gets pissed off a lot. But then he's only pissed off for about, what, a minute? And then he's straight back to calm. Straight back to calm. You can watch him if you like. Straight back to calm. And he plays his next game completely unaffected. Everyone tilts to some extent. The key thing is is for it not to affect you. So take a break if you're tilting. Take a break. The way I got around it was, if I was on a losing streak, I kept playing until I won a single game, and then I stopped. Because once I won that single game, I didn't feel as bad about it, and I could actually sort of take a break without feeling as if I'd never get there, which was a big problem, especially when I went on a losing streak. I went all the way down to rank 6 at one point from rank 1, and had to work all the way back up over a course of 3 days. So tilting is a very, very big problem and will wreck your motivation. It really, really will. If you allow yourself to tilt, then you'll drop down a couple of ranks and you'll never get back up. This has happened to Noxious a few times, is the most infamous case of this, where he's been up to rank 1 3 or 4 times, and every single season he gets pissed off at one particular deck or something, switches decks, drops down a bunch, and it just doesn't work. And a lot of people do this. There's a couple of other streamers that have also done this, but eventually they have learnt from their mistakes and actually made the climb in the end. But it is something that really does need to be hammered in, is the fact that if you think that you're a very, very good player, you will not get there, because you need to actually learn to get there. And if you just get pissed off at a deck because, oh, that deck is easy to play, and oh, he top decked me to death, you are never going to get there. I guarantee half the times you are going to top deck your opponents to death. You top deck your opponents to death just as many times as you get top decked to death. That is something very, very important to realize. Losing is part of the game. Even if you only have, like, a 60% win rate is insanely high. Most people only have 55%. That means that generally you'll be losing, winning, losing, win, lose, win, lose, win, lose, win, slowly climbing up, because every so often you get 2 wins in a row. And that is the important bit. Losing is part of the game, and if you let yourself get pissed off at losing continuously, then you won't be able to climb up, because there's no way you can get all the way up the ladder without losing a single game. So as far as mentality goes, don't think you're a superior player, and don't sort of allow yourself to tilt. If you let yourself learn from your mistakes, you'll go places, basically. Now, I sort of skipped a bit of a point in terms of the motivation here, because it does tie into mentality, and it also ties into sort of recording win-loss ratios. As far as motivation goes, it really is trying to keep yourself motivated as much as possible. It is very difficult, but sometimes if you get very, very close, I noticed this actually, when I was in rank 2, it was quite difficult for me. Rank 3 and rank 2 were the hardest. When I got to rank 1, because, like, once I stabilized in rank 1, because you go up and down all the time, you go from rank 1 to 2 to 1 to 2. That's just a normal part of laddering. But once I got to 1.3, I got really, really motivated because I was so close. So I played 30, 40 games in a row before I ended up getting to Legend. And I went up to 1.5 and then 1.0, 5 star, 0 star. That's what I mean by that. Over and over and over again. I went up to 1.5 about 4 different times. Lost 3 different times to Zoo. I almost stopped there, but I decided, you know, let's keep playing. Dropped down to no stars, and then won 6 games in a row. So getting yourself motivation is very important. For me, the motivation was trying to get back to the kind of player I used to be, and also I really wanted to actually get to Legend because I want to get back into the pro mentality of things, and I want to get back into tournaments and things like that, and I really want to play in that kind of stuff now because I'm not a tournament manager anymore. I can actually play in these things, and I want to sort of make the most of it. So that was my motivation. Everyone has to find something that is motivating for them. Just the sheer aspect of getting to Legend, to getting the badge, is not really enough. A lot of people they had this spur to get to Legend for the infamous card back sleeve, and it's not enough. You need to figure out some sort of personal objective for getting to Legend. That is the kind of thing you need, and this applies to all ladder climbing. If you have a personal objective that you need to get to rank 5, it can be competition amongst friends, it can be because you want to actually play the game more seriously, anything. It has to be something personal that actually gets you there. Just for sort of material gain in the case of card backs, it doesn't work. It really doesn't. It doesn't really work ever. And something I have noticed is that the first time to Legend is usually very, very difficult. Second and third time, people will say it's much, much easier because you don't have that crazy motivation to get to legend, but you do have the aspect that you know you've done it before, so you don't need that motivation anymore. You can still do it. If you want a ladder, you will, and you know you'll eventually get to legend if you keep going, and that's what drives most people who've already done it. But the first time is the most important one, it's the hardest one, and the motivation is the most important thing. And on to my last point. Now, the last point is improving as a player. Now, this has to do a lot with realizing your mistakes. It has to do a lot with figuring out that no deck is easy. No deck is easy. The difference between someone who's very good at a deck and very, very new to a deck is astronomical. It doesn't even matter what the deck is. I would say probably the lowest on the end of the skill train would be Zoo, probably, but even then there's some weird things like knowing when to play Doomguards and such to discard stuff, Soulfire management, life tap versus non-life tap for life gain, effective life gain. Even things like positional awareness for Defender of Argus if you top deck it, or Direwolf Alpha, when to trade, when not to trade. There's actually a lot of depth to any deck. Any deck has a lot of depth to it, and I guarantee that there are misplays in almost every single game. If you record your own games and watch them, you will find misplays or things that, while at the time they looked good, you didn't think about certain cards you had to play around and you lost the game because of it. And that's something very, very important to think about. In terms of the Hunter deck, which is perceived as brainless, I might add, and I actually thought it was. I thought it was when I actually started playing it. I thought it was very, very brainless, and I went all the way up from... At the beginning of the season, I was at 14, and I thought, I need to make this go faster, because it took me like a day to get from 20 to 14. It was going slowly, because I was playing a tempo rogue, so it was just going pretty slowly. So I thought, you know, I need to do this quickly. So I just went from 14 to 5 in about 3 hours, and it was incredibly brainless. But then when I got to 5, I hit a brick wall, and it's called the non-win streak section, which means you actually have to have a higher than 50% win rate. Not as easy as it looks when it comes to a rush deck, because there's so much RNG when it comes to actually drawing cards. Now, that extra 5% win rate comes from mastering the deck. And if you don't learn how to play the deck properly, you'll drop to a 45% win rate, because whenever you come across any of the same deck, the better player will win generally if you both draw similarly. So you just start losing and losing and losing, and you just hit a brick wall. You really do. Any deck needs skill to play it. Some need more decision making than others, but the point is that every single deck needs more. Basically, the better you are as a player, the better the deck will do. It doesn't matter what the deck is. The RNG element of Hearthstone, while it's there, is overplayed to the extreme by the community. It is insane. The amount of RNG in a game, while it's high, Hearthstone is not a game of luck. It's about 30% luck, I think, is what most people would agree on. It's about 30%. Some people put it at 50, 60%. No, it really isn't. A lot of it is to do with skill, and that's one of the main things to realize. Sometimes you get top decked. Sometimes you top deck your opponent. That's the luck element. But most of your games are to do with a decision that you as a player made consciously, or your opponent decided to play around and outplay you. Mind games come into a lot of this stuff. Things like against a warrior, playing an explosive and bluffing a misdirect can actually win you games sometimes. There is a lot of mental... There's a lot of sort of mental stress that goes into a Hearthstone match, and there's a lot more thought than people seem to think. And that's, I think, the most important point, is realizing that the game is not completely luck-based. If you think the game is completely luck-based, and you think that some cards, oh, they're just so skillless and they're so stupid, and anyone in the, like, any brainless moron could play this deck, no, you are wrong. Not at high levels. At low levels, any player can play anything. At really, really low levels, any player can play anything and they'll stay there. But once you start getting higher and higher and higher and higher, even Zoo, which a lot of people think is completely brainless, I guarantee that a Zoo player in Legend is much, much better of a Zoo player than someone at rank 10. I guarantee that difference does exist. One part of it is to do with motivation, part of it is to do with how they play, part of it is to do with risk taking, playing around things. There's a lot more depth to playing some of the brainless decks that people seem to think. There's even things like the overpowered thing. This happened to me a lot. Actually, the overpowered argument does happen a lot if you play the game too much and you get frustrated. For me, it was Warrior, but then I realized, wait a second, it's just a bad matchup, and I should be playing around it like it is a bad matchup. So I did. And this happens a lot. If you're playing Miracle Rogue, don't expect to win against rush decks with Wolf Riders and Arcane Golems, things. It's not going to happen. However, you can change your deck to mitigate the bad matchups. That's where Earthring Farseers have been coming in. Azure Drakes are just solid overall. Things like that. There have been edits to these decks to make them better against their bad matchups. And that is very, very important to realize. Even things like the Warrior deck has traditionally run 2 Armor Smiths. Recently it's come back a bit because you can roll into your own stuff against Miracle, but when Hunter was exiting, it went down to 1 because you don't need 2. Metagame shifting, editing your deck, playing differently, preparing yourself differently for every single match is what matters the most when it comes to laddering. And I do honestly believe that anyone can get to Legend, but they have to have the right mentality, the right motivation, and the ability to learn. That is what the average Hearthstone player needs to sort of unlock within themselves to make them into a Legend rank Hearthstone player. There is a difference between talented Hearthstone players and not talented Hearthstone players. However, the difference is not how good they can be, it's how much work is required to get there. And as far as I'm concerned, any player can do it. So all you need to do is figure out exactly what you need to do and how you need to approach it, and you will eventually get there if you have enough time. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback or just want to ask me questions or anything, put it in the comment section below. I will do a deck, not really a deck tech, a deck guide on the Hunter deck I did use, the version I did use. If you guys want me to, I'll do a video next Thursday about it if I get a couple comments about it or something like that on either this video or the tournament recap. And I'll put the deck I actually used in the description below as usual. So, as for now, this has been Jotto, signing off.